Good evening. I think we have a full house, and maybe I think there are a few seats around that can fill up. Good evening. This lecture is one of the last, I think, the last gift that Joan Lawson gave Horizon House, and she's given many over the years. But she arranged with Janelle to give this talk, and so some of us, and Joan and I were in this particular group that like to go around and find all the experts who live at Horizon House and exploit their talents, their skills, their experience, and their histories. And so we came across Janelle Reinelt, and Janelle and her husband Jerry, moved in last spring, so they're fairly recent residents. And but we're happy to have them here and happy to have Janelle willing to share some of her background. Just a word about her background. I won't go into it at length. It's too long. There are probably 7 or 8 pages of stuff, but I don't want to go into more than 2 or 3. She is a professor of theater and performance and PhD from Stanford, and then spent a number of years in California, in the California system as a professor, research, scholar, person moving up into higher and higher administrative things. And the last 10 years of her career, she spent at the University of Warwick in England. So she's a specialist in British theater. And her work, if you look at the list of the 7 or 8 books published and 30 or 40 articles published, you'll see that she's broadened from theater performance over into the political and social and cultural implications of all that. So there'll be books and articles on racism, on feminism, on politics, and so on. So it's a very broad-scaled career she's had in all this stuff. And of course, one of the principal figures in this theater is Samuel Beckett, who is the subject of the lecture tonight that Joan and I, mostly Joan, persuaded Janelle to come and share with us. So I will not take any longer than that, but I would just like to say we are happy, Janelle, to have you here, and we're all trying to figure out now who Samuel Beckett really was, because we've seen a lot of his stuff, but we're not really sure. So maybe you can straighten us out on that. Janelle Reinelt.
So I just said thank you to Bill for that very nice introduction and told him that probably I'm not going to be able to tell you who Samuel Beckett is, because that was a mystery and still is. I want to thank the Secular Humanists for sponsorship of this lecture, especially Joan Lawson, who, as Bill has indicated, was the person who really invited me and talked me into doing it. And I was just becoming really fond of Joan and good friends with her when she passed away. It was such a shock. I'd like to dedicate tonight's lecture to her, and also to my late friend Ruby Cohn, who was probably the Beckett scholar of her generation. And I'll talk about her a little bit more later. So, who is Samuel Beckett, and why am I talking about him? Well, that's a complicated question. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1969 for his essays, his fiction, his drama, some poetry even. But really it is as a dramatist that he's best known and, I think, remembered. I think he's the most important dramatist of the 20th century, with the possible exception of Bertolt Brecht. And he illustrates in the clearest theatrical terms post-war modern drama as we have it in the West, although he's well known and produced often in the East as well, meaning Japan and India and China. He was required reading in my college class, and Sue Veltfort, who's here tonight, where are you, Sue? Yeah. Tells me she remembered her son performing at a performing arts high school in Waiting for Godot in Los Angeles. Today, many English departments have a class on Beckett, maybe a special graduate seminar. He would be on master's and PhD exam lists, and he would also be in various literature departments. You see, it's complicated because he is Irish, but he wrote many of his works in French, and he lived in Paris most of his life. And only later he translated some of those plays into English. So French departments tend to teach him too, and the Samuel Beckett Center at Trinity College Dublin testifies to the claim that the Irish make on him as well. Beckett did live most of his life in France, and he was actually in the French Resistance in World War II. But he worked on productions of his plays all over the world, occasionally directing them, but most often collaborating closely with directors whom he trusted. Roger Blin in Paris, in France, and American Alan Schneider were two of his most frequent collaborators. He hated interviews and he never gave them. And he was very shy as well. So this is why I say I'm not going to be able to answer this question about who he was. He didn't like saying what his plays meant. He said, it's what I've written, was his answer to that. And he didn't go to his own Nobel Prize ceremony. And he didn't leave us a speech from that occasion. He was, however, very generous with students and some scholars, including Ruby Cohn, one of my mentors and colleagues, who was arguably the leading Beckett scholar of her generation. Her book, A Beckett Canon from 2001, is still an outstanding guide to all of his writings. Now, like other great writers, like Shakespeare, like Joyce, with whom he was a great friend, like Marcel Proust, a Beckett industry has grown up around Samuel Beckett. And there are a ton of books and journals and organizations and working groups. And I put some of them up here on a slide that you can kind of peruse. I also mentioned where there are important archives of his work at Trinity College Dublin, University of Reading in the UK, University of Austin, Texas, Boston College, and his letters are at Emory University. So I guess that's some of the reasons why I'm speaking about him tonight, and I want you to think about him a little bit. In my own case, the International Federation for Theater Research, which I've been associated with for many years, has a permanent working Beckett group that meets every year, scholars from across the world, to talk about his work. But I love Beckett because of his artistry and his innovation and his profundity. Associated with abstract concepts like theater of the absurd, modernism, existentialism, minimalism, anti-realism, and meta-theater, among others. What I find extraordinary is the unblinking confrontation with human beings, their embodied selves, in their situations and contexts, even though those situations and contexts are sometimes slightly strange. The performer's body and voice, as well as the precise words that he writes, are key to his work. Beckett has a lack of clutter on his stages, and this is very much a post-World War II thing that he more or less pioneered. He favored a shorter play over a longer. Most plays before the Second World War were 3 or 4 acts, and he wrote 1 act or maybe 2 and favored about 90 minutes on the stage. Before the Second World War, sets were cluttered. They were usually upper middle class drawing rooms or living rooms with lots of furniture and a lot of props. In other words, they were cluttered and they were of a particular milieu. So when Beckett provided the stage direction for Waiting for Godot that said, a country road, a tree, evening. It was a significant innovation and a mystery. Many have found Beckett's plays either too opaque or too gloomy. We'll explore this a bit tonight. I'm going to talk for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have 15 minutes of conversation, Q&A, whatever we want to do. And I have some clips to show, too. Surely he has, Beckett that is, an unblinking focus on winding down or running down, not on getting old per se, although he certainly treats aging and its physical ailments, but more a kind of coming toward the end of life. And he freely points out the miseries of our bodies as they fall apart, as well as how cruel we can be to each other as human beings. But I don't think that Beckett is a nihilist. Many people do. The Secular Humanists did a program a couple of months ago on Waiting for Godot, which was what gave me the idea of doing this. And Beckett was a free thinker, and he didn't believe in God. But many find a peculiar kind of uplift in his ironies, puns, jokes, and observations about human habits. And he has been mined by scholars who are Christian, Jewish, Buddhist, and Muslim. An example from my own preferred tradition, Buddhism, is Pema Chodron. Here are some of the religious books. I should have already shown this slide. I missed the cue there. Oh well. Anyway, here is Pema Chodron, who's an American-born Buddhist nun who is well known for her many books and teachings at Gampo Abbey Monastery in Nova Scotia, and some of you may have read her work. Now, the title is a Beckett quote, and right inside the cover, I'll just show you this little book as well as the cover on the slide there. Right inside there is the full Beckett quotation. Ever tried, ever failed, no matter. Try again, fail again, fail better. It comes from a prose piece he wrote called Worstward Ho, and Pema Chodron uses it in a graduation speech she gave at Europa University in 2014. Here's what she says about this quotation. When I hear the Samuel Beckett quote, what I hear is, in your life you fail. It's just part of life that things will happen that you don't want to happen. It is part of everyone's life experience. Fail better means you begin to have the ability to hold what I call the rawness of life in your heart and see it as your connection with other human beings and as part of your humanness. Failing better means that when these things happen in your life, they can become a source of growth, a source of forward. Out of that place of rawness, you can really communicate genuinely with other people. Chodron's one positive application of Beckett to Buddhism's first noble truth is the truth of suffering. So, one key to all of Beckett's work, I believe, and I was actually shown this by Ruby Cohn, my friend, is a 1931 essay that he wrote on Marcel Proust, the author of Remembrance of Things Past. He was 25 when he wrote this and hadn't written any of his great work yet. Time, memory, and habit. It seems to me the great philosophical themes Beckett follows in his work are there in his own interpretation of Marcel Proust. Time betrays us. Memory is mercurial. Habits are treaties we make with reality to hold suffering at bay. It works. But, as he says in Waiting for Godot, habit is the great deadener. In this essay on Proust, he says, memory and habit are attributes of the time cancer. So that's about as grim as you can get. On time, there is no escape from the hours and the days, neither from tomorrow nor from yesterday. We are not merely more weary than yesterday, we are other. Other than we were before the calamity of yesterday. And the interesting thing is that for him, the calamity of yesterday is not what particular thing happened, which might or might not have been a calamity, but that time is organized in past, present, and future in such a way as to create suffering for us. Memory, for him, is partial, it's suspect. Reality is never quite congruent with it. Scientists, of course, tell us that your memory and my memory of the exact same incident at which we were both present will be different in significant ways. Memory haunts us, but it escapes us too. In Endgame, Ham says, "What's happening? What's happening?" Something is taking its course. And that something is taking its course is kind of a refrain, not only in that play, but I believe across all of his work. Now, as for habit, as I said in Godot, he says, habit is the great deadener. Well, that's because habits are what we establish to structure the void, to give form, shape, and continuity where none exists. Habits are like treaties we make with existence, and we make them with other people too. And they work, they relieve us, but the problem is over time they wear out. And that funny joke that you could tell and always get a laugh does not produce a laugh anymore. That compact you had with your buddy to always support each other in a certain way goes stale, doesn't work. And then we are confronted with the emptiness and the void of human existence unless we make some new treaties. And this is kind of Beckett's version of how I believe we are interdependent on each other. Beckett's characters are often presented in a couple. This is, I think, because it illustrates the interdependence of all beings and the need for complicity with each other in order to structure our lives, the void, make habits, make treaties. I'll do this for you if you'll do that for me. Let's take a closer look at this feature with a clip from Waiting for Godot. This is Barry McGovern, an Irish actor who's done a lot of Beckett productions over the years. In an Irish production, he is Vladimir or Didi in this clip. And hopefully my clips will work. So I think you can see some of those bits, the treaties that the two of them have made with each other for filling time, for creating meaning, for having a bit of fun, and yet in the end, in this waiting, in this void, it doesn't do the trick anymore. So tonight I'm going to be focusing on 3 of Beckett's best-known full-length plays, Waiting for Godot, or Godot, depending on where you are and how people pronounce it, Endgame, which he wrote in French originally, Fin de Partie, which is literally Endgame, and Happy Days. I'll be showing a few clips to illustrate the differences that staging and acting make in changing the inflections of these plays. And this is important because performance is always quite different from text. Even if Beckett, and after his death his estate, did everything they could to avoid any possible changes to what he had set down. In Waiting for Godot, Vladimir and Estragon, whose nicknames are Gogo and Didi, are waiting on a country road for a Mr. Godot who never comes. Nothing much really happens. There are 2 acts, and the second seems to repeat the first on the following day. Only things seem to have gotten a little worse, seem to have degraded a little bit. Didi and Gogo meet Pozzo and Lucky, the other 2 characters in the play. Now, Pozzo seems to be a rich man and to have a slave servant named, ironically, Lucky, who definitely isn't. Oh, yes, and there's also a little boy, actually, the 5th character, who appears at the end of each act and says, Mr. Godot won't come today, but surely tomorrow. But while they wait, they fill the time. They have to. They tell jokes, they indulge in cliches, my favorite of which, with a little twist on it, is strike while the iron is freezing. So just kind of shifting that old cliche. They play well-rehearsed old bits, like you just saw them do. There's a hat trick where they do that old thing with 3 hats and the 2 of them switch those around. And they're afraid of the unknown. You saw that just at the beginning of this clip where there was nothing to be afraid of, but they were running around and tried to hide behind the tree. But at the same time that they're afraid, they're also really bored with the fact that nothing is happening. They have trouble remembering many things, but they both have special memories, important to one or the other. And I'm going to show you a bit of the text on this slide that's up there now. Let me just sort of go through it. I hope it's big enough that you can read it. Vladimir says, all the same, you can't tell me that this bears any resemblance to the Macon country, for example. You can't deny there's a big difference. But Estragon says, the Macon country? Who's talking to you about the Macon country? And Vladimir says, but you were there yourself in the Macon country. And Estragon says, no, I was never there in the Macon country. I've puked my puke of a life away here, I tell you, here in Krakon country. Vladimir says, but we were there together. I could swear to it, picking grapes for a man called, can't think of the name of the man, at a place called, can't think of the name of the place. Do you not remember? And Estragon says, well, it's possible. I didn't notice anything. And Vladimir says, but down there, everything is red. I didn't notice anything, Estragon says. I tell you. And Vladimir says, well, you're a hard man to get along with, Gogo. So there's that memory thing. Endgame was thought by many when it premiered in 1957 to be a post-nuclear disaster play, not least because the description of what lies outside the room is devastation and empty ruins. A kind of family lives inside the room, although we're never quite sure. Ham and Clove may be father and son, or adopted son. And Nag and Nell, the other 2 characters, are said to be the quote-unquote accursed progenitors, so probably the parents of Ham. Clove is a caretaker of sorts, and he talks a lot about leaving Ham, but he doesn't, like Vladimir and Estragon. Ham would like to finish, to end, but he doesn't either. Ruby Cohn, who I mentioned earlier, has noted the prevalence of verbal repetitions in this play, which Beckett, first wrote in French, and they underscore the themes we've discussed so far. I'll leave you is the most frequently repeated phrase in the play. 9 times we hear, there are no more, and this is, they'll ask for a biscuit. Ham asks for his painkillers. There are other things that are asked for and told there's no more of those anymore. Ham asks 7 times for his painkiller. Between them, Clove and Ham enunciate 0, 6.5 zeros. Once it's just 0. Twice, Ham repeats, use your head, can't you? Use your head. You're on Earth. There's no cure for that. It's worth pointing out that the set design and the opening of the play set up 2 windows high at the back of the stage, and Clove has to get on a little stepladder in order to see out. Lots of critics and scholars have noted the windows are like eyes, and that the interior of the room could be Ham's brain, and Nag and Nell in their trash cans as discards, and Ham and Clove merely an internal dialogue, not really 2 different human beings. Now, much of Beckett's work can be seen as either monologues, which he wrote many of, or as sort of interior consciousness being staged. And it seems to me this is clearly part of his design to evoke this. But that's not all of it. That's too simple and contained to be the whole story. And the devastation outside those windows now, in a production today, surely could not help but resonate and bring to the audience's mind climate change, which was, of course, not at all on the horizon in '57. I have 2 clips from Endgame to show you from the same production. This is a United States production by Steppenwolf, a very important theater company in Chicago. It does wonderful work and is known for its ensemble work. So here are those clips. Where's my... So again, I think you can see the themes that I've been talking about in terms of time, memory, structuring the treaties. It's pretty much all there in different ways in the different plays, and with different things at stake. Nag and Nell are strangely comforting to each other, even though they're antagonistic. And this seems to be a characteristic of most of the relationships that Beckett draws. He wants you, I believe, to both feel the comfort of those relationships, but also the abrasiveness and the frustration over many years. Yeah. So Happy Days was Beckett's last full-length play, and he wrote it in English. It premiered in 1961. It's kind of interesting. He couldn't get a theater in Paris that wanted to produce it, and I don't know why. I don't know the story behind that. So even though he had written it in France, it had its first production in the UK. It features Winnie and Willie, a couple who might be considered typical middle-class people, a typical middle-class couple, except that Winnie is buried in a great mound of earth or sand up to her waist in the first act, which is what you see on the screen, and up to her neck in the second act. And again, there's no explanation of what has happened to cause this. Her husband, Willie, has his own physical problems and lives on the other side of her mound, speaking very little. They too seem to be trying to end it, although Winnie proclaims it is a happy day and that she has many blessings. She is the eternal optimist and overwhelming protagonist of Happy Days. The beginning of the play shows the start of her day as she wakes, says her prayers, and then brushes her teeth. And the bit of business of brushing her teeth is, depending on the actress doing this, is quite a long, it is not a quick thing. She literally brushes her teeth, which is very sort of strange to watch. Everything Winnie has is inside a big shopping bag. And she takes items out of it and deals with them in one way or another, puts them on the mound, and then puts them back in her bag at the end of the day. It's a kind of ritual or habit. It also includes a gun, which she pulls out. And in one production, the actress kisses the gun and then puts it back. In others, just looks at it and doesn't really give us a clear notion of what she's thinking about. But the possibility of suicide is in all of Beckett's plays, practically. That is, it's considered in some way, although rejected. Gogo and Didi consider hanging themselves. Ham discusses the logistics of it. And Winnie, one can assume, keeps her gun with her in case things get too bad. But of course they won't, because she's determined to make it a happy day. Sort of. I have 2 clips from 2 different productions of this play that I want to show you. And here I'm beginning to shift what I want you to pay attention to from the time, memory, habit kinds of thematics to the sorts of staging and different performers and the difference that those performers' choices make to how you're experiencing the play. So the first clip is Fiona Shaw, a well-known Irish actress who's done she's done the classics, the Greeks, Shakespeare, often in novel ways. And then the second is Diana Wiest, who is an American actress who did the play in 2017 with Yale Repertory Theater. And then several other venues, such as the Mark Taper Forum in LA, where this clip originated in 2019. The second clip is tricky because it's actually an interview with her and the director about doing the play, interspersed then with scenes from the play. So when you first hear her voice, she's talking about what you're seeing rather than enacting it. But I think it'll be clear to you when you see it. We can see. First, though, is Fiona Shaw. Now, at the very beginning of this, it's not the beginning of the play. She's been carrying on, so you pick up in media res. The last leg of this presentation on Beckett takes us into the most important theatrical aspect of his work, the presence of comedy among his serious and often bleak themes, and the physicality demanded of actors who try to do his work. Bill Irwin is a West Coast actor. He was an original member of the Pickle Family Circus, if any of you know about that, and one of Beckett's most admired and devoted actors. We're going to watch a promotional clip from he did a solo show about Beckett that toured all over, including here in Seattle. Did any of you see it? Ah, good, okay. And I also want to follow this by returning to Godot for a final clip of Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart, arguably the most well-known British actors on the planet, for another consideration of acting style and temperament. And then we'll open it up for discussion. So I guess what I'm wanting is for you to see this sort of mixture and balance between the kind of really quite grim and in-your-face confrontation with the hard and difficult process of being a human being and, as Lucky says, wasting and pining. And at the same time, the kind of incredible comedy and technical brilliance that is built into the words as he wrote them. But they need to be brought to life, of course, by particular actors on particular stages in their own specific ways. So I'm hoping that maybe this has been a pleasure to see some of these wonderful performances and helped you think about Beckett in some useful ways. It's now, we've got some time for some questions and answers, and Jenny and Bill have microphones, and I would love to hear what you have to say, or even just your comments about Beckett plays you've seen, or attitudes towards him you have. It's fine with me if you hate his stuff. That's what makes it rich, that we all have our own reads on these authors.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How much do you suppose he influenced or was influenced by the music hall and pantomime?
Quite a lot, I believe. Bill Irwin says, I guess it's in a different clip, it wasn't in this one. Bill Irwin has researched this, of course, as he would. And when he was a young man in Ireland, he went to the music hall a lot. And so it's a tradition that is very familiar to him. It seems to me that certain of the quotations, like the hat trick, or the thing that is not in the script. This is Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart's little thing where they do that shebang thing. It seems to me that those things are very specifically music hall, yeah. And when you watch Bill Irwin clown, all of that kind of comes back. So I think it very much is deliberate in Beckett's case. Everybody has their clowning traditions. And in France, in some of the French productions, you can see a different style of clowning that is from their culture, if you will. So yes, I think it's very strong in his work.
My recollection is in the couple of present productions I've seen of Waiting for Godot, one of the performers is sort of acts like a dog. Does this?
Yes, this is Lucky, and this could have been the performer. I'll explain in a moment. But there is, because Lucky comes in, Pozzo and Lucky come in, as Beckett's written it, and Lucky is on a long leash, and the leash is around his neck, and he has a running sore. Those things are all specified in the text. So you can just imagine what that looks like on a stage if you follow that. And then there's a way in which I think Gogo and Dee Dee kind of treat him more as an animal than as a person in the first part of that scene. And there's a wonderful moment where, Estragon decides he's going to go over and take a closer look at him. And he's saying, "Oh, this poor man! Look, it's an outrage. He's got this running sore on his neck." And he gets up close to him, and Lucky kicks him, just like a dog who might snap at you when you were trying to be kind of friendly. So there are reasons why I think that sounds right, that are text-based, that is written in. On the other hand, I saw a remarkable production of Bertolt Brecht's The Irresistible Rise of Arturo Ui, with a German actor who played Ui as a dog. I mean, he jumped, and he was a hound. He had worked out incredible movements that were dog-like. And that's not in the text, but it was very effective in that particular production. I can imagine that the actor you saw might have used some dog-like cringes or movements or things deliberately.
There was a lot of panting.
There is panting in the text. That's called for. I mean, that's even spoken of. They even mentioned that he pants.
For what it's worth, there's somebody in the room who played that role. Bill Jones. Are you here, Bill?
Yes, he's right here.
He played.
You played Lucky? Oh, that's amazing. Lucky is one of the hardest roles in the repertoire. Yeah, no kidding. And you have this incredible monologue that goes on and on and on and on.
Think so?
Was anybody else in here in a production in your youth or at some point? No? Okay.
Just a quick question again. Do you know whether the filming of Rafe Richardson, and I cannot remember the other actor's name, they were a famous pair.
John Gielgud.
John Gielgud. The two of them played, and it was on film. I saw them on the stage in London in the 50s, and it was breathtaking.
Well, I'm sure, I haven't seen that film. It is absolutely, that performance is one of the classic.
Is it?
Yeah, absolutely. But I don't know, I bet it exists somewhere. I mean, there's such a huge Beckett archive. And I'm sure that if you've seen a film, that it exists and that it's.
That long ago?
Well, I didn't know until you told me that there was a film version of it. But in the 50s, they could have made a film version of it.
No, it was in the 60s.
It was in the
But I saw the
60s.
stage play in the 50s.
Oh, I see. I see. Well, I'm going to look into that because I bet it is. I bet it's available. It may not be on YouTube, but it's going to be somewhere. A lot of stuff, you know, if you like Beckett and you want to sort of investigate this more, there is a lot on YouTube. That's where I went to get some of the clips and things that I had. And not everything is there, but there's enough that you could see a variety of things, which is fun. Yeah. Yes, was there? Yes.
I don't know. Yeah,
Laura.
Some other people may have been in Seattle when Act Theater first got started in the 60s, and they did Theater of the Absurd at the beginning. Edward Albee, Harold Pinter, and I just thought maybe you could say something about Beckett's relationship to that. Are they his followers, or how would you describe their relationship?
Sure. There's a kind of group of playwrights that were associated with that concept of theater of the absurd. Now, the concept itself came from a book that Martin Esslin wrote called Theater of the Absurd. And Martin Esslin was a BBC journalist. And this was sort of, I would say, a popularized book that became like the Bible for a few years until other people began to write also. And so the phrase stuck. And theater of the absurd really comes from existentialism, from Camus and Sartre, who were in their heyday in the 50s and 60s, in the sense that many people had either read them or knew about them. And that the notion, it's Camus' really phrase that life is absurd. But absurd is a very interesting word because it has a whole lot of different kind of connotations. It can mean ridiculous when you say, "Ah, that's absurd," and you mean it doesn't make sense or it's crazy or whatever. But it's also got in this sort of heavier connotation of being unexplainable, of being beyond making sense, and not necessarily having content, specific content. So we're back again to the void and emptiness, which were key concepts as well. That we were flung into existence was another famous phrase. That man had, Sartre's phrase was that mankind had no essence, only existence. And what he meant by that was, you know how you say so-and-so has a good nature, or from birth, human beings are naturally good or whatever. This group of philosophers were saying, no, there's nothing there. It is what you do and how you live that determines what you are, and we only know that for sure when you die, because when you die, it's complete. And that it changes all the time, that we live in radical freedom was another key. Camus and Sartre had these concepts. So there's a whole group of playwrights who didn't agree with all of that, but who worked with some of those ideas. And if you think about the people at a contemporary theater that you mentioned, the authors, let's see, there was Pinter, and who else did you mention? Albee, Ionesco, I would guess, yeah, okay, and Beckett, of course. They all have a slightly different vision of the world, but they don't believe in the kind of everyday realism that was so dominant on our stages and becoming so with what happened in the film industry. Realism became absolutely the dominant acting mode or whatever. So one of the things that those playwrights share is a kind of twisted or warped lens. I like to compare it also to Cubist painters, you know, with a slightly broken and yet whole representation of reality. So the representation does not have to be natural or realistic. I'll use the word again. I'm looking for something else there. It can be actually quite strange, and that might capture reality better than an everyday representation that was hyper real. Let's put it that way. Does that help?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It's great to be making that.
Yeah. By the way, I'm not too interested in that group of playwrights. The question of being derivative, they all had their own. I mean, you think about Pinter, Ionesco, Beckett, Albee. They're really different from each other. So, I mean, we're all influenced by each other, our contemporaries, etc. But I think they were of them as really very distinct.
Can you tell us anything about his personal life?
Not a whole lot, because he was such a private person.
I know he was very shy.
He was married, but he got married late in life. They were domestic partners for a long time. I forget what year he got married in, but he died in '89, and I think maybe in his late in the late 70s he might have married her. I forget her name, Louisa. Anyway, so there's not much that we know. I don't think he had children. And part of why I think that is because there isn't, you know, a son or a daughter that we're dealing with here. There is a very good biography on him by James Knowlson. And there were a few people that Beckett got close to and allowed to study him in that way. But he also didn't think biography was important in a writer. He didn't want you thinking about him in his life. He wanted you to read his plays, you know. So I think he tried not to have his personal life in the public domain very much. However, we do know what happened to him from year to year and like that. And here's a funny joke on us academics. There was a young woman named Deidre Blair who was a graduate student. And I'm not sure this is true, but what was said was that she wasn't especially bright. But Beckett befriended her. And he allowed her access to many of his materials and allowed her to write a biography about him. And it was actually the first. James Knowlson worked on his for 10 years or whatever. So here comes this graduate student who publishes this book. And people the academics were so pissed off about this, you know. And they were so, you know, and they said, oh, it's full of typos and, you know, she can't write good English. And I mean, they were really pretty mean to her. Now that's all past. That was you know, that people got over it, and it is one biography among others, and it may not be as good as the James Knowles, which is so well researched and documented and elegantly written, blah, blah, blah. But I like that as a joke on the Academy, because we have to laugh at each other too, you know. Yeah, thumbing his nose. A little bit of that, I think.
Other questions? 1906. It's on my slide. I think. Let me just check and make sure I got it right, you know. Sometimes. Oh, no, that's going to. Okay, well, we all appreciate what Janelle has given us tonight.
1906.
And
Thank you. Thank you very much.
thank you very much.